Welcome to the Menopause Unplugged Podcast with me, your host, Nikki Oliveira. On this podcast, we will hear from women who are navigating the challenging and transformative journey of perimenopause and menopause. These women have graciously agreed to share their stories and insights, offering a raw and honest glimpse into what it's like to go through this major life transition. From hot flushes to rediscovering themselves, our guests will provide a wealth of knowledge and inspiration for anyone who's going through or will go through menopause. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and join us for a fascinating and enlightening discussion. Welcome to the Menopause Unplugged podcast with me, your host, Nikki Oliveira. Today in the studio, I have with me menopause fitness trainer, Kate. How are you doing, Kate? Okay?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad this morning, thank you.
Good.
So, Kate, I obviously menopause is the sort of the space that you're working in, but let's cover your own actual menopausal journey. How did it all begin? How did you first notice it?
Yeah, so for me, it did, and I think it crept up, rather, hit me like a train, which I think probably resonates with a lot of women. There's not enough education around the menopause, so many of us are very unprepared for this sort of stage of life. And I think also, I was 42, so sort of any of the symptoms that I was experiencing, many of my friends, I'd sort of maybe mumbled, oh, could it be menopause? And they were like, no, you're too young, you're too young. So, in terms of sort of the education and the misconceptions around menopause, I think many of us are left wondering what is actually going on. And that was very much the camp that I was in. I was a fitness trainer. I was a mother of three. My youngest, Rupert, at the time was 2, so I very much blamed it on he's a terrible sleeper, so I blamed a lot of my exhaustion, just joint aches and pains, and just various not feeling myself on the fact that I was a mum looking after a young child and caring for 2 other children, as well as working. But just a lot of things didn't really add up for me. I'm quite intuitive. I know my body well. And the sort of the night sweats, the pains that I was experiencing across my whole back and my neck were, they were debilitating. I wasn't necessarily able to carry out my normal daily routine and my daily functions. So, that's not a symptom of a busy life or having a young child. So I went to the doctor, and sadly, my menopause did actually coincide with lockdown. So obviously, seeing a doctor was pretty impossible. Essentially, they sort of came up with the conclusion again that they do with many women, that I was depressed. Experiencing my dad was ill, so I was coping with that. And I knew that it was something different, and I think that's my biggest take out of this. And the one thing that I really want women to understand is that your body. And yes, I know that there are medical professionals out there who have learnt to diagnose and do things, but at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable with a diagnosis that you have been given, let's say like I was with depression, not that I was embarrassed at all, I would be fine with a diagnosis of depression, but I just knew that it wasn't. So I was fortunate enough, I did go privately, and I was then diagnosed with menopause. But I think also, and I know we'll come on to that, I don't want people to think, I got my HRT and that was very much it, and I stuck it on and it worked, because it didn't. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was
Sorry.
Would you say it's a mixture of physical symptoms as well as
mine were terrible. My night sweats were terrible. My joint aches and pain were crippling. I was very anxious. I had breathlessness. I felt very low. So there's a whole myriad of things. But again, a lot of those things could have been, we were in lockdown, I was juggling a family. So I don't, kind of think at this point the doctor was like wrong, but I think that the fact that she didn't mention that it could be menopause, that was just not even something that came up. They did full blood tests. I had an ECG. I had a chest X-ray. So I had all of these things done. And again, really important to say, I think also that that's quite good, because what we don't want to do is ultimately blame menopause for everything and miss anything. And so I understand why the GP did that. That they ruled out anything more sinister. And I'm grateful for that. And obviously it wasn't that. But they still didn't then go down that route of then diagnosing perimenopause, which I had to do privately.
Yeah. So we'll stay on this theme, right? Of obviously the help that you sought out then, and then we'll come back to the other sort of questions. But so you had obviously discussed hormone replacement therapy. How did that go for you? What was your sort of initial dosage, preparation, that sort of...
Yeah, no, I mean, I won't talk about the dosage, because I hate doing that, because I think women can get really caught up in that's what you were on, this is what you were on. But I think the underlying thing of that is that my HRT arrived and I looked at it for 3 months. So despite having had a diagnosis, I was then still scared to take it, which again, I know I'm not alone in having those thoughts. And I was particularly educated in it as in HRT, and the benefits way outweighing the risks. Yet there was still something in me that kept on saying, "Are you sure you're menopausal? Are you sure this is what it is?" And again, having spoken to people, that is very much self-doubt is another sort of symptom of menopause. So I looked at it for 3 months, and then I bit the bullet. And I mean, I'm very happy to say I started on the gel. And being a fitness trainer and always sort of being sweaty. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But always working out or a shower or whatever. I just think that it didn't necessarily suit my lifestyle. I was also on the Progestan tablet, so it was my progesterone part of the HRT, which if you don't have a uterus is really, really important to take. And so I then switched over to the patches. But nothing, do you know what? It changed a little bit. What happened? My night sweats probably got a bit better. But I still knew I had a long way to go. And it was at that point I realized it was absolutely fundamental and non-negotiable to start looking at how I was eating, what I was doing, how I was moving, how I was working out. Because HRT alone is absolutely not the silver bullet. For some women, absolutely yes, it might be the push to get them to moving if they are experiencing really crippling symptoms. But I think if you start taking HRT for that reason, for crippling symptoms, start your exercise routine and your diet at the same time, because A, it will happen quicker for you, and B, if you do get some relief from the HRT, from those symptoms, you may then be tempted to not put into practice exercise and diet, only to then find out a month or two later that although you're feeling a little bit better, those symptoms begin to creep up again. So for me, it is absolutely something that has to be done as a trio. And so I did. I stopped drinking. I started looking at how to eat. I realized that having done my own research, that actually HIIT, whilst a really effective way of working out, is not, it's a blanket prescription for women, not taking into account anyone that's going through, a hormone deficiency. So I really started to up the weights. Now, look, don't get me wrong, my body shape has probably changed a lot as well. HIIT definitely for me was a way of maintaining weight. But I think you then got to weigh it all up, right? Do you want to maintain weight, which, I know many people, or do you want to build a strong body for life and future-proof your body? And for me, that far outweighs any aesthetic benefit, that I am mobile, that I'm strong, that I now have no joint aches and pains, and I'm stronger mentally and physically than that previous version of myself. So, I get that some women would be maybe take the pains over everything else for the aesthetic benefits, but that's not for me. I want to be around, for as long as I possibly can to look after my kids, run around after my kids
Yeah.
and also my grandchildren. That's not to say that what I'm doing is going to necessarily prevent any disease that I might be predisposed to, but if something comes up my way, or I had a fall and I had a fracture, my body is in the best possible place to fight back.
Absolutely, yeah. So Kate, I know we've just touched on how you adapted your exercise, but obviously as a fitness trainer, I mean, we practice what we preach in terms of diet and so on as well. So how did your diet change when you obviously started making all your lifestyle changes?
Well, I think kind of it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? I think it's so funny because I know Tim Spector did that brilliant podcast with Stephen, and obviously the catch line and the hook for everybody was, exercise or diet. You don't need to exercise or whatever, diet, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that was a catch line and a good one because it was a great podcast, which we all then watched. I think what is important is that they go hand in hand. It's a lovely little circle for me. And it doesn't really matter which one comes first, but they both are very much entwined. So in terms of changing my diet, in cutting out alcohol, I didn't really, my sugar cravings decreased. So I didn't find I was making bad food choices. So I really believe it is all about balance. I love crisps. I love chocolate. I love sweet foods, but I don't deny myself all of those. But definitely when I was drinking and I wasn't thinking about what I was doing, I was probably indulging more in those types of foods. And actually what I know, if I'm lifting weights and I'm lifting heavy, I need to nourish my body with protein so that I can rebuild that muscle that I'm trying to do, that my muscle can repair. I also know that I need carbs to fuel that workout, whereas a lot of women think that carb cutting is a really good way. It's not. It's like taking your car out with empty gas. It's going to stop and you're not going to be able to go as far as you'd like to have gone. And so that, for me, is a really important analogy in making sure what we eat. If you want to push and you want to go further and you want to reach those strength goals, you need to fuel the tank. And protein, as we know, for women going through menopause is really, really important. From the age of sort of 40 to 50, we are going to be experiencing sarcopenia, where our muscle mass begins to decline. And so protein is going to help us build that alongside lifting weights. So really and they're not big tweaks. Like, it sounds like I'm talking, do this and do that, and there's a lot to do. It's really, really very simple. And that is the key, is to not overthink any of this. I'm not asking anyone to restrict stuff or take stuff away. I'm asking you to add. And actually, in adding all that good stuff, you'll find that just some of those little bad habits fall to the side. If you eat a lovely, full, filling breakfast, you won't have that mid-morning crash where you think, oh, I'm just going to pick on something. And then, you have your lunch, and then, after lunch, I need a sugary treat. And then you get that mid-afternoon lull. I'm simply saying, if you make these little lifestyle changes, you will be able to add goodness to your diet. You won't find yourself restricting.
Absolutely. And I am a big advocate for that. Get your protein in earlier in the day, and it helps set you up for the rest of the day in terms of that kind of sugar roller coaster that many of us will experience, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, for a good night's sleep, you want to be full. Your body needs to, if we're cutting carbs, you're going to wake up hungry. And so it's really important that we think about the whole package, protein at every single meal. I know people worry that obviously if you have too much protein, your body doesn't store it and it stores as fat. The reality is we're not going to be eating enough protein for that to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. So, Kate, apart from sort of diet and exercise, did you start incorporating any sort of mindfulness, meditation, those sorts of things to manage your stress?
I'm really bad at managing my stress, and I'm really bad at doing all of that. But what I do, and actually on the app, which I have an amazing breathwork expert called Anna, who does classes for us, and she is great. And I will switch off and I will listen to her, and that does work. But she also introduced me to cold water. Well, I say she introduced me to cold water. A friend of mine introduced me to cold water swimming in the sea. And then she gave me the opportunity of taking that one step further because she has cold water tanks. And for me, that became a real way of switching off and managing my anxiety and working on my breath work. So I definitely made changes there. I'm still really trying to learn to do that because I have a very chaotic, busy life. That's not a kind of, oh, I wish I didn't. I like being busy. I have ADHD. So I mean, you know, I'm not, which is a superpower because it means that I can kind of keep on going. I'm sure I will crash at some point. But I love being busy, and so I am terrible at switching off. But that moment that I'm in the water, I find my breath. And if I am anxious and going through periods of anxiety, I can sit on the sofa, I can switch off, and I can just breathe.
Yeah.
And hold it and out. And I know what I'm doing, and I know how to calm that parasympathetic system, and I know what it needs. So that's definitely something that I have learned over the last few years, and not something that I ever knew how to do before. And what I would do before, if I'm honest with you, in terms of stress, unless it was kind of if I'd have a drink, that wouldn't necessarily obviously be at like midday, but you'd get, you know, you'd be there at midday going, oh, so stressed. Oh, I can't do it. I just wish it was 5 o'clock, that witching hour, mum's wine time, which only exacerbated those situations. So now that doesn't really happen. And I've learned that when those feelings creep in, is the lovely breathwork session, taking a step back.
Yeah.
Help.
Wonderful. Yeah. So important, Kate. Absolutely. And I think you're right. You know, it's never too late to start.
No.
You know, if doing something new, whether it's breath work, whether it's, you know, just taking a minute. Of quiet time off to, you know, on your own, just to have no noise even around you, you know. I think we're so programmed to this constant noise and hustle and bustle around us. Just to sit with your own thoughts, even in quietness, it can help so much.
Definitely. I totally agree.
So yeah. So what other challenges, Kate, have you faced then since being perimenopausal that you've now overcome? Anything
Well, I think
specific?
I mean, I guess I think that menopause obviously coincides a lot of the time with, you know, that sandwich generation. So caring for elderly or sick parents. So my dad obviously was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the beginning of my perimenopause journey, and I was one of his main carers. So, you know, dealing with that stress was quite intense at the same time as trying to work and carrying on with the family. And I think that plays in to a lot of midlife women's, you know, journey through menopause. And it can really derail them because, you know, you might be in this place where you've started this brilliant way of feeling good, and then something just comes along and knocks you sideways. But again, what I would say is if you've created this toolkit, you know, that is helping you manage your menopause symptoms, and something like that does come along to derail you, stick with it. Like the one thing I did, and as I said, I was caring with my dad. I was with him for the last 3 weeks of his life. I was still teaching. I was still running. I was still eating well, you know, because I didn't want the fact that I was trying to look after him, an excuse to, you know, eat rubbish, because that's generally sometimes what we might turn to do, but to actually be able to feel strong at a time when I needed to be even stronger. And so for me, exercise and eating well is exactly that. Like I probably go overboard slightly into a time of crisis, because because it helps me manage my symptoms. I know that if I eat chocolate and sweets, my anxiety gets worse. It's the sugar. So very much, when I was going through that particular phase with my dad, I carried on, as I say, I carried on teaching. And I think even the day before he died, I taught a class, and lifting those weights and having that time. We talk about having that space. For me, lifting weights is my space. Like I'm not thinking about anything. I'm thinking about my form. I'm thinking about lifting the weights. I'm thinking about going heavier in that next round. I'm thinking about challenging myself. And even if I got 15 minutes of that, for me, I've switched off at 15 minutes. So I would say that
Yeah.
is one of the challenges. I think another challenge, and I know you're slightly at the different end of the spectrum here, but is obviously teenagers, and managing their expectations and their lives. I hear a lot of people go, "Oh, it is very hard having young children." It doesn't necessarily get any easier. Every life stage has a challenge, and I think we have to be really mindful of that for parents, not to be dismissive that because we're not in the like intense stage of young children. Actually, we're dealing with social media, drugs, alcohol, vaping, sex, all of that with
Yeah.
our older children, which actually for somebody like me who does carry a lot of stress and anxiety and worry, it can be again another derailment. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that these life challenges do come along. I think for women to know that they're not alone, and that they are hard. We live in a society where we see these images on social media of everybody's perfect life, and it is so far from that. And I think that's what I like to do. I like to keep it real. I'm having a terrible
Yeah.
week this week. My son is in Ibiza. He is 17, and I'm terrified. I've got my phone there. I don't know. I trust him. It's not that. It could be somebody else's issue. Something goes wrong. So that is one worry. And then Rupert, bless him, he's got a few of his own little medical conditions, and so there's a call from the doctor. So we're just juggling all these little things, and we
Yeah.
show up on social media all smiles, and yet sometimes behind we're just slightly cracking. And I will be very, very
Yeah.
honest about that. And actually, I'm taking August off. That is my plan, because at the moment I really need that space, and I really need to step back and be a little bit more present for my family. So I think that, and that's the one thing that, again, I think for midlife women, we keep trying to show up. And sometimes we don't stop and just go, okay, do you know what? I'm just going to do nothing today. It's
Yeah.
I don't know. We seem to be that generation of women.
Yeah. And yeah, your own individual needs start to become, secondary to everything else. And it's just a case of taking a little more time for yourself and saying, is that really important? Do I have to get that done right now?
Yeah.
And reprioritizing what really matters and trying to stop the overthinking and trying to have control of everything at all times, because we just can't do it all.
No, and it's hard, isn't it? I think it's harder for some people than others. I'm a big overthinker. I get massively overwhelmed. And also there's something, something like I love the community that I've created, and I really care for them. So like, obviously I've got my family who I adore and love and would like do anything for, but also this amazing community of women who I want to support, because actually they do support me. So I was saying to someone this morning, it's that really lovely thing that sort of the owning your menopause isn't me, it's like it's all of us together, and that's really special and really unique. And as much as I'm championing them, they're championing me, and that I think for me is something that I'm really proud to have created, and I'm really grateful to be a part of.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely, Kate. It's so special just to reassure each other that, what, you're not the only one having a bad day. You're not the only one struggling with your symptoms, etc., and you've got a safe place to share and speak about that.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, completely.
Yeah. So did you experience any other sort of challenges with your personal relationships, like with your husband or with the
Well,
rest of your family or friends?
I shouted a lot at everybody. Everybody thought I was mad, and they all were like, "Oh my God, here she goes again. She's irrational and she's shouting for no reason." But I think once I realised it was menopause and I explained it to them, and that again is another really important thing to do, is to let them in and say, "Look, you know." Equally on that same side as my daughter, when she's got her periods, it's like, oh, everybody take cover. It was the same thing. So it's just that menopause has always been something that's been seen to be such as a taboo, whereas we talk about menstrual cycles and periods, with no worry. So as long, I think once I'd said to them, the reason I've been feeling down, the reason I've had my joint aches and pains is because this is what's happening. I'm at the other end of the spectrum, and now they get it. So my husband now literally is every woman wants to sit next to him at a dinner party, because actually he can not empathize rather, but he understands and he gets it. So they always like to sort of chat if they want to chat menopause, they can, and he doesn't, he probably knows more about it than they do. So I think, I think for me, we've definitely had our ups and our downs. Again, that, I went through menopause in lockdown, so you're living in this very sort of small space, you're on top of each other, your hormones are crashing. So it's been a really difficult time. And what I would say to anyone that might be experiencing that time is just don't make any rash decisions. If it is your hormones, get it sorted, talk to your partner, talk to your kids, ask them to support you, and see how you go over 6 months, over to the year, because it is really difficult when you've got teens now that go to bed later than you. So they come in and say goodnight to us at like 10:30, and we've been in bed for an hour. There's a massive lack of privacy. As you begin to have teenagers in the house as well, and then they bowl over with all their friends. So your relationship is very, very strained because actually you don't have that much time for each other. So, I would say try and make time for each other. Again, that's something I'm terrible at doing. But we are going away next week. And actually, we have got someone who's going to be able to help us. And I've said to my husband, we can go out for dinner on our own on holiday. It's like, wow. So even little things like that. I know. And it sounds crazy, doesn't it? Because I think people just think it. And I would say don't float along in that kind of pattern. Address situations when they come up as well. And I always say to Jerry that this is a snippet of our time, and in 5-6 years time, the kids won't be here as much, no one will be around, and we can kind of start again. It's like it's like a new beginning. So I think that's the thing, is put the positive, try and bring the positives in it, that it's it's always a good time to assess a relationship. It's always a good time to share and talk and let people know what's going on. And it can be really, really valuable, I think, in saving a lot of marriages, and for a lot of women who feel very alone in their marriages, which I know many people can. And I was one of those people for a long time. I felt very invisible. But as soon as you open up and talk about it, and they're not dismissive, hopefully, you can begin to just go on an uphill trajectory.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Kate. Communication is key, as we always say, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really goes a long. So is there any other advice, Kate, that you would like to share with the listeners on anyone who's about to go through perimenopause and menopause, or are currently going through it?
I would say, obviously, lift weights. That's what I'll always say. Try and find a program where you can lift weights. But just to know that you can own it, and it can get better, and you can thrive if you make the lifestyle tweaks that you need to. It's never going to be an even keel. Okay, it's going to be up, it's going to be down. But just to know that if you can build that toolkit, if you can find what it is that predominantly works for you, and when you just falter off or it doesn't feel right, you can pull it back and you can begin to manage it again. So I think finding what works for you is really important, and to talk and to share and to find your community and to find your tribe of women who are there to hold you up.
Absolutely. Amazing, Kate. Well, it's been lovely to speak to you today.
No, thank you so much for
yeah,
having
I'm
me.
sure absolutely, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Menopause Unplugged. I hope you found the conversation to be informative, enlightening, and empowering. Remember, menopause is a natural part of a woman's life journey, but it doesn't have to be a lonely one. Whether you're experiencing perimenopause or menopause, my menopause coaching program can provide reassurance and guidance. Please do reach out to me through my contact details on the show description. And until next time, take care.